Hi, this is David again, and I'm just going to do a video here on cults. There's several videos that I have that you can look down through and see my opinion on cults. I've finally kind of grown to a position that there's real no definition of a cult. Basically, there are cult behaviors, and what you have to look at to determine whether you want to be involved in that organization is how many cult behaviors do they have, how do they implement them, and how important those cult behaviors are to the organization. I've come to the conclusion that the Mormon Church has many cult behaviors. Now, the specific question on a request for a video was, when did the Mormons start to become a cult, and a little bit of history and background. And again, just from my personal experience, I'm not an expert. When I read the history of Joseph Smith from Kirtland, Ohio, where he got chased out of town by the members of the church, where he learned, printing monopoly money and taking real monies from the members, didn't work well for him there. Then again, in Missouri, he was in Liberty Jail. In New York, he was convicted of fraud and was given what they called leg bail, which means get on your legs and run the hell out of this county or you're going to jail, as a money digger and a peepstone magician, etc. Going back to Nauvoo, after Joseph went through all of those shenanigans, I'm going to say, and I've never said this before, I think Joseph Smith was a pretty smart man. I think he knew human psychology very well, and I think he got his ass burned 3 or 4 times before he learned how to consolidate power in Nauvoo. Now, Governor Boggs, the Mormons hate. There's no reason to hate Governor Boggs. He gave the Nauvoo city a charter. He gave it to the Mormons and Joseph Smith and said, you can build a city, don't do stupid stuff. Well, when you say that to the Mormons, it doesn't matter. They still do stupid stuff. So Joseph then used one of the common laws in Missouri at that time to build a militia. Well, a militia in those days was basically for enemies or Indians or other kinds of wars. They're kind of like the National Guard that they could be called up. Well, Joseph kind of got smart, I think, right at that point. When he saw, God, I want to say 3,000. I could be deadly wrong on that number. But that's how large the Nauvoo militia was. Well, he puts a big, George Washington hat on his head and a sword and a white horse and prances around like he's a General George Washington. Well, he liked that power, and he was smart to use the militia idea incorrectly. He was using his militia to protect himself and the city of Nauvoo and the Mormons. That's not the way it was designed to be. Well, Joseph started to get a little bit smarter in Nauvoo, and he began to realize some of the power of government. He was elected mayor. He was the general, he was the mayor, and obviously the city council were like the 12 apostles. So he had no trouble passing legislation for himself and for the citizens of the city of Nauvoo. Well, after the Nauvoo Legion, and after being mayor, he kind of got cocky, and William Law, and I think Bennett, owned the Expositor newspaper, and they were both excommunicated by Joseph, and they were going to write an article the next day on his shenanigans with 14-year-old girls and being a polygamist and marrying 10 women who already were married, which is called adultery, and also the 14-year-old girls. Well, Joseph was mayor, and they had a midnight or after dark meeting, and he pulled the city council together. And now here, this is the beginning. Well, I shouldn't say the very beginning, but my memory of the beginning of the Mormons using the law and interpreting words that were never meant to be used that way. he declared the expositor a public nuisance. Well, most of you, I don't know, you're pretty young. Maybe you haven't heard the term of a public nuisance, but a public nuisance is like a swimming pool that is empty and is not fenced, where little kids can fall down 6 or 9 feet and be injured, or adults, or a big hole in the road that no one has fixed or put up any signs on. So a public nuisance, that was the way the law was meant to be used. Well, Joseph used it as a newspaper that was going to say some negative things about him. So a long story short, I don't know where he was. I'm sure he was standing and watching. But the city council and some other members of the church went down and they destroyed the Nauvoo Expositor. They tore the building up. They took all the presses and threw them out on the ground, all the type, all the paper, and that publication about his shenanigans could never take place. Well, Joseph was used to jumping on a horse and hightailing it out of town like the Lone Ranger rides again. Well, Governor Boggs went bullshit. Burning a free paper in the United States because you don't like what they're saying about you, don't fly. And he was afraid of the Nauvoo Legion, Boggs, because he knew Joseph may be crazy and order them to attack indiscriminately, and Boggs didn't know where. So Boggs pulled the Nauvoo charter. They weren't a city anymore. And he disbanded and outlawed the militia that Joseph created, mostly for himself and protection. Well, Joseph was hightailing it, leg bail, but it was horse leg bail, just like Kirtland, out of Nauvoo. And some of his cohorts came to him and said, man, you're being a coward. You're leaving all the members of the church here, and they're stuck. They don't have a prophet, and it don't look good, man. Well, Joseph was reportedly... Now, I'm going to tell you what I think he said, and then I'm going to tell you what the Mormons said he said. So when his friend said to him, you're being a coward, you should stand up to these charges, Joseph said, holy shit, they're going to kill me. I'm screwed. I got way too many wives. I burned the press. The charter has been pulled because I've gotten caught with my panties down around my ankles. Now, that's David's Mormon quote of Joseph Smith leaving Nauvoo. Now, what the books say, and the Mormons wrote him, of course, he said, well, I go like a lamb to the slaughter. Well, I think Charles Manson said the same thing, the serial killer. And Joseph was right. He hasn't said too many truthful things, but Carthage was not a good place for him to go. Well, Joseph had gathered around himself at that point some men, Oliver Cowdery, Rigdon, and Whitmore, and others who were prone to want to be power brokers. They saw Joseph build his own town, get his own militia, print his own money, and give the United States a run for their money. They saw him do crazy stuff like polygamy and marrying 14-year-olds and supposedly getting away with it. So in the early part of the church there, Sidney Rigdon, I think it was, wanted to take over the church after Joseph was killed at Carthage. And he stood up before the general conference of the people and said crazy stuff, that Joseph had ordained him to take over, and he knew Joseph and what the Lord wanted, and he's the new prophet. Well, the Mormons didn't think much of Sidney Rigdon, and they said, no, we don't think you're the new prophet. Well, Brigham Young. Now, Brigham Young had a personality. I think he might have been bipolar. I mean, he was not only smart, but he was ruthless, and he was cruel, and he loved power. He loved to stand up and shake the world and say, I represent God. I am God. And Brigham stood up in the same meeting, I think, and gave a speech about him becoming the new prophet of the church. Well, that to me was one of the first real set-offs to becoming a cult. It was cult behaviors. And Brigham was a dynamic speaker. He was exciting. He had a great personality. The members of the church, the official church history, says that the members that were in the audience saw his face and his body turn into Joseph Smith. It's kind of like the Lamanites and the blacks turning white if they become Mormon. This metamorphosis is a very common doctrine in the Mormon church. But be that as it may, Brigham became the new leader of the church. And boy, he was an ass kicker. Brigham, he took all the people to Utah, and Emma Smith did not care for Brigham at all. So Emma and her children stayed back, and they became the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was written that Joseph's son would become the next prophet, and he did become the next prophet of the reorganized church. And I think there might have been, he might have had a son, and then there might have been one more son, and then all they had were daughters. So that organization went belly up, and they left Jackson County, Missouri there, and I think they sold the tabernacle. I don't know if they sold the temple, but they have a new name. It's like the Church of Christ or the Reformed Church of Christ, and they're flourishing to a certain extent, but they don't have that prophet anymore. Well, Brigham was ruthless, and Brigham was smart. He was a colonizer, and he knew the further away from the U.S. government and out of the territorial United States, the more ruthless and the more powerful he would become. I think that that's the first starting of the cult. Or cult behaviors. He basically didn't let the people read or write or hear anything, and he was the man in charge. And if you cross Brigham Young, he had people like Porter Rockwell and other Danites that just basically poisoned you or shot you dead, and no one ever saw their bodies again. So Brigham was a pretty ruthless guy, but he was smart in some ways. Our streets in Salt Lake City and finding an address in Salt Lake is easy as can be. That's Brigham Young. The streets are very wide in Salt Lake, like a modern city, and he built them back then. And he started there that Salt Lake Temple and organized its organization. He built the Beehive House and housed several of his wives in there, and it got too small, so then he built the Lion House, which held some of the lesser wives. Then he got divorced, and he shut that up real quick. That lady, I think the 27th wife, divorced him. And then he built pretty much of a castle house, kitty corner, where ZCMI had sat for years now, and is now torn down for the mall. But his favorite wife, he built a really big and nice home right there. So he showed favorites, and if any of the girls said anything, he'd kick their ass. Well, Brigham then began to understand, and he had training from Joseph Smith to be sneaky. And Brigham actually was smarter than Joseph Smith. That's my take on it. Brigham did shit that it was hard for anybody to find out about. The Continental Railroad, Brigham brought through Utah, and that made a big change in Utah. It brought in supplies and shipment of cattle out, and Utah became a state. I forget if it was 1845, 1850. Days of 49. I think it was 1949 they became a state. Well, Brigham pulled a lot of shenanigans. There were people killed under Brigham, and he decided to make up some scripture himself, and his was short. He said that God was man and man was God, and the God Adam theory flourished under Brigham Young. And then the church said, that's stupid, after he died, and they abandoned the God-Adam theory of Brigham Young. And of course, Brigham is the most famous polygamist probably in the United States. Brigham Young University was named after him, and the University of Utah had its beginnings, I believe, in the Mormon church under Brigham Young. Well, then Brigham, he learned to shut things up. He learned to stonewall, and he learned to murder, and he learned many, many cult behaviors. Well, the people that surrounded Brigham, they learned those behaviors too. And when Brigham ordered 120 innocent men, women, and children slaughtered in St. George, he had put up a wall 4 or 5 deep that it wasn't him. Well, it was him. Wilford Woodruff's journal said that Brigham said, vengeance is mine, and I've just had a little, when he was standing in front of the monument for the Golden Meadows. Brigham also said crazy things about blacks, and if you marry a black, they have children, you should cut the heads off the whole family. Brigham was very prejudiced and very ruthless and very hostile. And he sent a lot of innocent people out in desolate areas to start communities. Some of the communities are still around. Most of them are not. Most of them didn't have water. Of course, they didn't have modern roads or conveniences, and the people were desolate and stranded. So I think the real beginning was Joseph experimenting with pushing the envelope. Brigham never went to Washington that I know of. And I guess he was the governor and the prophet, but he didn't build an army. Members of the church were kind of his army, and he saw what building an army did. It threatened the state of Illinois, and Governor Boggs went berserk. So after Brigham, you start to see more and more consolidation of cult behaviors. You saw Wilford Woodruff and John Taylor, a polygamist, and then writing to the government and saying, we've stopped polygamy, and that wasn't true. They took 2 or 3 wives after they made those promises. And then John Taylor was under enormous pressure, and he wrote another declaration to the U.S. government and said, oh, we're not having polygamy here. And he lied. He took 2 more wives, I think, in the Salt Lake Temple after that. And then you come down to, I don't know if I have these in order or not, Lorenzo Snow. Well, Lorenzo was handed a shit organization. It was going bankrupt, and the federal government was coming to confiscate temples and buildings, ward houses, and he was panicked. So he was the one that brought up the tithing issue in the Mormon church. Well, when you fund a cult, man, oh man, they can buy advertisement and they can look normal and try to be mainstream, but Snow brought the Mormon church out of bankruptcy. Now, you come on down, I remember, another one that I remember, David O. McKay. He seemed like a nice guy. From what I saw with David O. McKay, he didn't seem weird. I don't know what he did to consolidate or to bring in more tithing and finances. But the building fund, suddenly the Mormons didn't have to pay for anymore. And the tithing for missionaries, the Mormons only pay like 10% now, where they used to pay 100%. And the church began to support, and there were entitlements to being a Mormon. Well, you know, you get these Republicans that say, well, we don't want any entitlements. Well, they do. The entitlements for the church is welfare, and you get a free missionary ride, and you get free tuition at BYU. If you're a general authority, you get a 70% discount if you're not a general authority. So the Mormon church began to consolidate. And when they saw that power, that they could just stand up at a podium or just pick up the phone and say, this is what I want, man, it started to draw all kinds of defective mental people. Coming to mind is Boyd K. Packer. Boyd K. Packer is one of the nutballs. I can't remember. I think it might have been Holland that said, when somebody said to Holland, you know, Boyd K. Packer says a lot of stupid stuff. And Holland said, well, it's hard to manage a bear on stage. So all the apostles and prophets knew he was an idiot. And well, he's still an idiot. He's next in line. And I can't wait for Monson to die and have Boyd K. Packer, the head of the Mormon church, because that may do it in. That may do it in. He's the one that's come up with the sex stuff. Your penis and your vagina and your testicles are a little factory, and you can't have union members in there, and you can't be using the little factory, and basically you will rot in hell if you touch your penis in any kind of a pleasurable way. Well, he's the one that wears a seatbelt in the conferences because he's so old and he's so decrepit that he slips off the seat during the filming of the conference, and Monson hates to pick him up off the ground and put him back, so they just got him a seatbelt. So anyway, the cult began to consolidate. The welfare program began to support. It was kind of like a net for people who didn't have jobs or lost their income, single moms that had babies at home, and the church created its own welfare state and entitlement. And if you crossed them, man, you lost all of your welfare benefits. You may have lost your job. You might lose your home because you can't pay for it, and you're not going to get any free food or milk for your kids. It goes on and on. So as that power began to consolidate in Salt Lake City, and I'm going to say it started with John Taylor more. I mean, Joseph started it, Brigham expanded it, and John Taylor really began to pull down on it. And then once you got to the Hinkster, my God, it was a military camp. And the Hinkster loved to stand up, and he'd wave the white handkerchief like he was at a UCLA football game. He stole that, and so when they dedicated the Nauvoo Temple, which there's not enough Mormons within 1,000 miles to use that, but he wanted revenge. He wanted to show the world that they were driven out of Nauvoo, but they're back. See? Take a look at my video on the revenge of the Mormons with Mitt Romney. So he built this multi-million-dollar building there that basically nobody uses. And at the temple dedication, they were all waving white handkerchiefs, and he had a Holy of Holies, what do they call that, the up in the roof of the temples. I can't think of the name right now. But anyway, the Hinkster, he saw that power, and he saw that money flowing in to the coffers of the Mormon church. Well, they hired a lot of business. A lot of the apostles have business degrees, and they knew about the Cayman Islands and Swiss banks, and to hide the money and to turn out into newspapers and radio stations and cattle ranches, and to pay taxes on the Bonneville Corporation. But the Mormon Church is a 501c3. They don't have to report anything. So the Hinckley, my gosh, he was just drunk with money and cult. He knocked down the alumni house at BYU, which was a perfectly good building, and he built a brand new one, and he decided to name it the Jesus Alumni House. Then he thought about it and goes, no, we don't do anything with Jesus. It's the Hinckley Alumni House. So now that I'm BYU alumni, I have to go into the Hinkster's house to get degrees or to get transcripts or whatever. So he had his, 93rd birthday or something down at BYU. And oh my God, he used money after money. I think he had it in the Marriott Center, and there were thousands and thousands of people there. And he's waving the white hanky and making good that he is the prophet. And the Hinkster and Monson conspired. It used to be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, they conspired, and most of the members of the church don't know this. The Mormons do not belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They belong to the corporation of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's a 501c3 still, but it's a corporation now, and it has corporate officers, and it runs its monies corporately, but they're non-taxable. So the Mormons that think they belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so they're duped as usual. They're usually innocent people, and the authorities just take advantage. Well, they did that before the Hinkster died. Now, they have a machine. They had one of the original machines. Now, the machine is fairly common among corporations in important places where you have to have a signature of the corporate president to move anything, money or change. And they had a machine, and Hinckley was too feeble. And I think this went back to Ezra Taft Benson. I've heard Steve Benson talk a little bit. He's the great-grandson that machine existed then. And what the machine does is it takes the signature of the corporate head, and when they become too senile and too crippled to sign their name, the machine will sign it for them. And so when Hinckley died, the machine signed over everything to Monson, and Monson knew that it would sign over to him because they had colluded to change it to the corporation of the president. So whoever became president now had total control. So now you're seeing very, very strong cult tactics and behaviors. People are threatened. People are signing and doing things under duress. Mormons can't get a job in Utah without being a Mormon. You better not smoke or drink or you're going to hell. You have to go to a state liquor store to get liquor. If you go in to buy a dildo for your wife, you have to present your name, your license number, look up into the cameras, and everybody's looking that, you know, you're going to have some fun in life. And the Mormon girls don't go in there. It's very rigid in Utah, and that money now, the Hinkster changed. The IRS was starting to come in on the Mormon church because it didn't appear to be much of a church. It gave $6 per year to the humanitarian fund per member, but it was taking in billions and billions a year. So the Hinkster got smart because most of the 12 apostles sat on corporate committees. And when you sit on a corporate board of trustees, you're paid. You're paid. They may get $50,000, $100,000 to be there, supposedly for their expertise. Well, some of those, including Monson, were on 10 to 15 boards. So they were used to pushing 6, 7, 800,000 a year. But the IRS goes, hey. So Hinkster got with his CPAs and they said, okay, get the guys off the boards. That's the number one thing. And we'll give them a living expense, which is legal in a 501c3. So they could push $600,000 and $700,000 incomes and not report it because it's in a 501. And so that's what they did. And the Hinkster did that, and he made an announcement, not many church members heard it, that the paid ministry went down the poop chute, that he was changing that, and now under Monson, the authorities, clear on down to mission presidents and 70s, are receiving an income. The stake president down, they don't receive an income. They just get free phone calls and free attorney fees and, you know, a little bit of perks like that. So anyway, I don't see Joseph Smith sitting down and saying, let's make a cult. I don't see Brigham Young sitting down or any of the other prophets. But you know, anywhere you have big money, now you can take this to the bank. This is from God, David the God. Anywhere you have big money that's unaccounted for, you have corruption. I've never seen it any other way in my lifetime. When you have secret big money, there's always corruption. And I'm sure there's a lot of corruption up there in Salt Lake. But I think that the authorities are under the death threat of their family, that if they ever divulge it, they will kill their grandchildren and their kids. And that's why they continue with the fraud up there. So I think you have to add up. You can go on the internet and see how cults are measured. But the behaviors of the Mormon church are extremely cultish. Fear, believing that you can get into God's kingdom by paying your money, and obey, blind obedience. The comment, when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done. Follow the prophet, we thank thee, O God, for a prophet. I mean, there's not a lot of Jesus, Christ, in the Mormon church, and that's why a lot of people call it a cult, and why a lot of people don't believe that they're Christian. So that's kind of my take. The Mormon church has grown into serious, numerous cult behaviors. And when I take a look at the Moonies, Waco, David Koresh in Waco, and take a look at Jim Jones in Guyana, and when I see all of these other religions that have been called cults, I certainly put the Mormons right in there, very close. And it's like a poison. When they first start out in the cult, they think it's wonderful. It takes 20 years to start to realize you're hooked in there, and you're not coming out without losing everything you've worked for. So it's kind of like a black widow spider. You know, the guy has great sex with her, the male spider, and then she eats him. And I mean his whole body. So, you know, to me, that's, again, the Mormon church. It's easy to get in, and it's fun, fun, fun for the first 10 or 20 years. And after that, you know, the virus and the poison starts to take effect, and you're trapped. You're trapped. There's very few of us who can get out of that at an advanced age. That when you lose everything that you've worked for your whole life and all the principles you believed in, and you thought you were special and a peculiar people, and then find out the history of this organization, and you start to look at cult behaviors, many of us have resigned. And I'm going to do a video here. The resignations are way up. The church is cracking. Whether it crumbles or not, I'm going to doubt, because when you've got billions and billions of dollars and you're sitting on it, it's hard to crumble. So there's my video on the cults of the Mormon church. Is it a cult? You decide. Thanks.